Hello and welcome to today's Pro-Democracy broadcast. I'm your host, Davina. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you also to any replay viewers and to the Patreons who've continued to support me during my increasingly irregular visits. I'm going to try and tune in more frequently going forwards. This is an important time in American history and indeed world history. So we've seen the rise of strong-arm style fascism in the United States, a president who was notable for his criminal desperation to stay in power and his commitment to throwing the lives of innocent Americans under the bus in his pursuit of electoral advantage by falsely selling COVID to the American people as a hoax or a hoax construction of the left, the media, Democrats, in order to oppress Americans, thus distracting from his own contracting economy under his tariffs, which were inadvisable and a very poor decision for the American economy. And it was leading to a contracting manufacturing sector at the end of 2019. And of course, we've seen what happened as a consequence of that. Trump, in his urgency to sign a trade deal with the Chinese government and paper over the spreading economic contraction from the manufacturing sector to the transport and storage economic sectors of the American economy, pushed aside concerns about COVID and instead embraced the Chinese president, President Xi, and said everything was great, that the Chinese were handling it well, and it was nothing that America had to worry about, and that the stock market should stay high and stay at a level that he was prepared to congratulate himself for. So you don't hear a lot about that from the media. Trump was able to take advantage of COVID to make sure that the media had other things to focus on. And the media have certainly been very compliant in making their reporting congruent to Republican desired narratives. And that's been the case for a long time. I would imagine it is in no small degree attributable to the fact that the owners of various media outlets are in fact mega billionaires who have a vested interest in extending and in promoting Republican narratives, because it leads to lower taxes for themselves when Republicans are able to not just maintain office, but able to maintain a controlling say. Because to go against some catechisms of politics in America, bipartisan politics isn't actually that great for America. That's often a word that describes gridlock and paralysis, because when Republicans are in the minority party, they sabotage activity from Democrats in power in order to reduce the chances of them being able to return to office. So the bipartisanship of the filibuster, the forced bipartisanship compelled by the filibuster, is something that imperils functional democracy and functional governance in the United States. I'm Australian, but I've been actively studying United States politics for a few years now, and I've moved to America with my family. So my interest in this is no longer even academic, although it was never strictly academic. American politics is key to solving the humanity imperiling threat of climate change and biodiversity reductions and just general threats to viable human occupying biospheres. The civilization that we all exist in is under threat from increasingly frequent and severe extreme weather events, changing weather patterns, changing viability of agricultural practices and agricultural processes. So that decreases the stability of our world, and everyone, not just Americans, should have, if they're paying attention, a strong interest in American governance, because Americans either lead the way or sabotage action on the front of preserving viable biospheres for humans to inhabit. I seem to be shaking the screen a little bit, so I'll try to stop that from happening. Now, my title for the day of Meadows and Hawley and the Sandy Hook anniversary and the villages is some topics I should get to. So as a summary, Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff of the former president, Donald Trump, is being recommended for prosecution for failing to comply with a congressional subpoena from the January the 6th committee. And what came out in the hearing last night was that various text messages that Mark Meadows handed over to the committee illustrate that Fox News hosts were appealing to the president via his chief of staff, texting him to say variously, please stop it, call your people off. Let's have a look at some of the exact wording because it is important. Laura Ingraham wrote something. What did she write? She wrote to Mark Meadows, "Hey Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy." Fox News host Brian Kilmeade also wrote to Mark Meadows, "Please get him on TV, destroying everything you have accomplished." That was Brian Kilmeade's text on the day of January the 6th. And Trump friend and Fox News host Sean Hannity simply asked Meadows, can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol. So particularly Laura Ingraham's remarks indicate that these Fox News hosts understood who was inciting the insurrection, who had the power to persuade these people to do or refrain from doing something. And that person was Donald Trump. He incited violence, and I don't know if you will have heard this explanation, but it's circulating amongst a subset of people paying attention, at least on Twitter, and that is it was Trump's intention to delay the certification of Biden's 2020 electoral victory in order to increase pressure on Mike Pence and to increase the viability of telling the American people that the process of certifying the election had been disrupted, so they were going to go with a different process. It's been disrupted. The Capitol's been disrupted. They were hoping for protests, counter-protests from Antifa type folk turning up to protest the fascism of Trump supporters barraging their way into the Capitol and attacking police officers. They were hoping to be able to set the National Guard against Antifa and say, well, whoopsies, we've got to call martial law. So the PowerPoint that Mark Meadows handed over to the January 6th committee had some suggestions, some recommendations for action to help Trump gain a second term, and that was claiming that Venezuela and China had somehow infiltrated American electronic voting systems, and the way forward was to just discount all electronic votes in that election. So the election was passed, states had certified the elections. What Trump and allies were proposing to do was discard all the votes of millions and millions of Americans who had used the established apparatus of voting in various states. That was all going to be thrown out the window, and these suggestions were contained in a PowerPoint that is attributed to a retired colonel by the name of Phil Waldron, who had sent the PowerPoint to Mark Meadows. And it's claimed that this PowerPoint was shared with some Republican senators and congresspeople. What steps did they follow of that plan? Well, they didn't jettison all electronic votes. They didn't establish a perimeter of the National Guard around polling places and say, we're just going to discard all the electronic votes and count paper votes. But it is interesting because the plan is conditional on Mike Pence being able to say, this is how it goes. I'm someone with authority. I'm not the president, but it's my job to certify the election. So I'm going to say no to that. It's too contentious. The results of the election are too contentious. We're going to ignore the rafts of electors sent from these various swing states that ultimately Biden won. And instead, we're going to accept alternate rafts of electors sent by different states. Now, there were a few different points this plan failed at, and none of the states that were called contentious by Trump and his allies actually went through with a plan of sending a raft of alternate electors. So, that's how the electoral college system works. Instead of just having a popular vote that's won or lost by a candidate, you have states. And whoever has won a state wins a certain number of electoral college votes that's then certified by the state, and they're counted on a day that's enmeshed in American tradition, the 6th of January. I guess it's probably stipulated in the Constitution. Shall I grab the Constitution? Yes, because there's one particular part of the Constitution that's very relevant today, and that's Section 3 of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Let's have a look at that. It's Amendment 15. Okay, here we go. Amendment 14, which was ratified on July the 9th, 1868. Section 3 says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of vice president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So, to engage with the implications of that, if Trump is found to have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States, he shall not be allowed to hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state, with the exception that then Congress could, with a 2/3 vote in the House of Representatives and the Senate, remove that condition. Say, okay, well, that person's sedition crimes, is it sedition? Insurrection. Engaging in insurrection, we don't mind that. So if they could get 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate to say, well, that shouldn't apply to Trump, then he would be excused of that requirement in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to not have engaged in insurrection. Now, one might say, oh, it's difficult to prove that Trump engaged in insurrection. And it would be difficult if you had to rely alone on the words he uttered at the ellipse on the 6th of January, because they were violence inciting words, but they were sufficiently difficult to argue that in a court, that he knew what he was doing when he said, you have to fight for the country or you won't have a country anymore. Follow me. We're all going to march on the Capitol together. And when we have the proof of the defense of many people charged with violence on the 6th of January, charged with breaching the Capitol, charged with attacking officers, charged with defacing the building and destroying property in America's seat of government. A lot of those defendants have said, we felt that we were being instructed by the president to do this on his behalf, to attack the Capitol, to remedy the injustice of the election being stolen from him, despite over 60 court cases being found in the interests of the American people and against the interests of the democracy overthrowing aspirational Trump. Now, that was an important read from the Constitution. Don't forget that Section 3, Amendment 14. It'll come up again, I'm sure. Actually, what I can do for now is share with you an article written on the 13th of January. Which is where I got my inspiration from that. They say in practice it's unlikely that a court would be prepared to disqualify a former president from running for office again. But it's a close issue, and one the Supreme Court may have to take up if Trump announces a 2024 candidacy. So, of course, that's a very strong motivation for Trump to take up a 2024 candidacy, to ask the Supreme Court to essentially rule on, was it insurrection, or was it insurrection enough? I'm so happy to be broadcasting with you all today. It is good to be able to share these thoughts and just to contribute to informing people. Now, one group of people who are very committed to sharing information and bringing you facts and videos which are very illustrative of those facts is the Meadows brothers, who have a group called the Meadows Touch. Brett Meadows made a recording of Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee and Senator Josh Hawley, also Republican, who were interviewing in a committee hearing FBI Director Christopher Wray, and they were sounding very concerned about, well, I'll let you have a listen.
Are you geolocating people through the FBI based on where they were on January 6th?
He asked you about the geolocation and metadata aspects and gathering related to gathering of metadata, that is related to your investigation into the January 6th riot. Tell me what you know about this.
So is the FBI accessing cell phone tower metadata from telecommunications companies?
Shortly after 2 p.m., as the siege was fully underway, Senator Lee describes it, phone rang, it was Donald Trump.
I hope you can understand my concern.
Sure, you can appreciate my concern here.
Why so concerned? Indeed. So as a voiceover for that video, I would like to point out the camera focus, the editors of that video scrolled in on, or zoomed in rather, on Josh Hawley's fidgeting hands. And their questions were, what data are you accessing? What geographical location data? What metadata? I.e., can you find out who these people were communicating with and where they were located? Why were they so concerned? What exactly is their level of involvement with the elements of the January 6th insurrection that were organized? Because a lot of people did get caught up in the flow of the moment and the persuasive language used by the president and other speakers at the Stop the Steal protest on that day. But there were other people who had come with weapons and who had come with a plan. There were oath keepers. There were Proud Boys. There were people who had a rapid response team organized across the river. There were a lot of elements, and elements that are now being more publicly revealed as court cases progress, with more significant charges for January the 6th defendants. So someone was given a 4-year jail sentence the other day. Let's maybe look up and see who exactly it was. We'll go Jan 6 defendant, 4-year sentence. Scott Fairlamb, sentence for assaulting an officer, a former New Jersey gym owner. That's New York Times, which is going to be a bummer. So, but at least I could just Google Scott Fairlamb then. Okay, let's go Scott Fairlamb, because I don't have a New York Times subscription. Oh, so he's from New Jersey, and on the 10th of November, he was sentenced to 41 months in prison by a federal judge who called his actions an affront to society and the law, and said he was smart to plead guilty rather than take his chances with a jury that would see numerous videos of his actions. So Scott Kevin Fairlamb, 44, was captured on various videos screaming profanely in support of the pro-Trump insurrection, climbing on the inauguration scaffolding outside the Capitol, and then pushing an officer into a group of people and punching the officer's face shield, as well as briefly entering the Capitol. All right. In the days after the assault on Congress, Fairlamb posted and then deleted videos of himself at the Capitol. Okay, I'm just going to click share on the screen so you can see what I see. Peter Parker, nice to see you as well. It's always great to see repeat listeners. All right. So this is Scott Fairlamb. What is he holding in his mouth? We'll have a look. He's sentenced to 41 months for assaulting officer, which is the stiffest punishment yet. So after the video, he posted and deleted videos of himself at the Capitol and issued statements such as, "It's go time," and "Q said this word for word," and "I'd go again," according to court records. Prosecutors on Wednesday played videos of Fairlamb assaulting the DC police officer and shouting at him, "Are you an American? Act like one. You guys have no idea what the bleep you're doing." All right, so what is he? Oh, he's got a pepper ball beneath his teeth, between his teeth. That's what he's holding. He's got a bit of a beard. Fairlamb has since become apologetic, with his attorney saying in his sentencing memorandum that he did in fact feel as if he had been duped by social media prior to January the 6th. He agreed to meet with the House Select Committee investigating the attack, which his lawyer said the DC jail denied. Oh, what a bummer. He could have met with the January the 6th House Committee. And he suffered a heart attack whilst in custody. So I guess he's not happy to be meeting with consequences for those actions on that day. "I take full responsibility for what I did," Fairlamb told the judge. "That is not Scott Fairlamb. That's not who I am. That's not who I was raised to be. I truly regret my actions that day. I have nothing but remorse." So I'm glad he's seen the light on that. Blaming social media for misleading him is a little bit missing the mark because, yes, social media is definitely a mechanism for conveying propaganda, but there's a lot of propaganda that was just distributed from the mouth of the president, which continues to be the case with regards to COVID and the potent ecosystem that involves Trump sharing messages that are repeated by Fox News and Fox News giving Trump messages to repeat back to the public. That potent ecosystem of disinformation is still costing American lives. 1,000 a day Americans are still dying from COVID, and those numbers are still not only largely comprised of the unvaccinated, the willfully unvaccinated, but it also illustrates that even vaccinated people who die are vulnerable people who should have been protected by a strong net of community vaccination. And that net had too many holes in it and continues to have too many holes in it because only 60% of the public are vaccinated. And the holdouts, whether they know it or not, whether they're doing this consciously or not, are pushing forward with a Republican agenda of sabotaging public health in order to wreak havoc on the American economy and the American people, in order to deter independent voters from endorsing Joe Biden, not just giving him a good approval rating or not to pollsters, but actively failing to form a resolve to vote for him in the future and to vote for other Democratic candidates. They are undermining America's pandemic response for political gain. That's worse even than obstructing policy that Democrats put forward. That's not just obstructing policy, that's obstructing public health messaging in order to cause more people to die, in order to cause more people to sicken and grow ill and have potentially lifelong disabilities with regards to energy levels, sense of smell and taste, ability to take part in daily employment, ability to conduct self-care activities as well. So a lot of people's lives are being ruined by the unnecessary prolongation of a pandemic at the implicit encouragement of Fox News news hosts and OAN news hosts and various other active disinformation agents such as Joe Rogan, Aaron Rodgers, individuals who take it upon themselves to spread vaccine disinformation, as well as people who are entrenched and established players in a conservative ecosystem that has become so rampant with disinformation that the deadliness is very obvious. It doesn't even need academic studies to establish that, yes, people have been harmed by economic austerity policies that are landmarks of the Reagan Republican era and post-Reagan era of denying people social safety mechanisms, of cutting back on social safety net programs in order to create hardship and then claim that government is ineffective. So you should either just fail to vote or vote for the anti-government, anti-establishment party. And that what really ails government is there's not enough to go around because migrants, because people of color, because Mexicans are soaking up too much of the resources. That's always the Republicans' narrative for why they fail to deliver and why they actively obstruct Republican politicians from delivering whenever they have access to power. And in that way, the fault lines in American society have rusted on racism and rusted on suspicion of other people and rusted on caste type thinking, whereby you have to conceive of yourself as more meritorious than others because of your skin color. And to perpetuate that belief, you have to keep looking for the worst in others of different skin color. Fox will help you find it, but you'll find it anyway because you have that inclination and it supports your mental framework. It supports your understanding of the world and it supports your own understanding of your own value. And if that's how you construct value for yourself and value for your family, that you disparage others and you think to yourself, others are unworthy of government help and others are needlessly consuming government help and they are not real Americans and they're unworthy Americans, then you'll keep voting for people who will keep sadomasochistically inflicting pain on your country and on you as well. Oops. So I hope that was a little speech that had some meaning and resonance with people who watch. But I know I have to keep saying it and that I have to try and do more to work to broaden the audience. Every ripple in a pond is still contributing to disturbing the calm equanimity of the pond. And the thing is, a lot of us white people have to contend with the fact that a lot of white people are very invested, whether they know it or not, in preserving the status quo. So it offends them. It makes them defensive. If you say the status quo is actually not as calm as you think, maybe it's calm on the surface, there is a lot of injustice and inequality underneath that could be addressed and things could be improved and our whole society would benefit as a consequence of reducing injustice and reducing unnecessary entrapment in cycles of poverty. There's lots of things that can be done to remedy poverty cycles and to end poverty cycles, powers that government has to lift the lot of people. I have a follower who's saying something. Her name's Olivia Carroll. Don't know what that thing is that you're saying, Olivia, but feel free to clarify your point at any time. So I'd like to take a moment to say veil for those children who lost their lives, whose lives were stolen from them by the actions of one boy with a gun, but also by the overall effect of fetishizing guns in American culture and overinflating the significance of the Second Amendment, which was actually to give permission for militias to arm themselves with weapons, for America to have an informal army that was not paid wages and was not equipped by the state, which didn't have the money for it at that time in history, but wanted to have a freestanding army. And one of the reasons to have a freestanding army was to defend America from foreign invasion, but also, to be frank, one of the reasons to have militias was to prevent an uprising by American slaves. And so, yes, the Second Amendment, to a degree, is a part of preserving the dynamic of slavery, of being able to intimidate and threaten Black people to prevent them and deter them from presuming to have equality with white people. And you can see that when white people pose with a lot of guns for their Christmas cards, and their faces are happy and they're living their values, but their values are brutal, violent intimidation of others. And if you think about it for a minute, you can see really who they're trying to intimidate and who hears that message loud and clear. It's the kind of people who know that they would be targets of Kyle Rittenhouse. That Kyle Rittenhouse was talking about wanting to shoot shoplifters 2 weeks before he went to Kenosha and shot dead 2 people and injured a third. He was shooting rioters. He was hoping to shoot people protesting against a black man, Jacob Blake, being shot 7 times. So he was going to shoot, he went to Kenosha in Wisconsin to shoot either black people or allies of black people, and to preserve a stratification of society in which black people know their place and don't protest and don't inflict retributive property damage to discourage white people from committing racist injustices against black citizens. So yes, I'm not in favor of property damage as retribution for crimes of injustice and police brutality. But at the same time, I don't aspire to taking a weapon to enforce a dynamic of intimidation and violence. Hey, Molly. And everybody understood to a degree that the court system was endorsing white vigilantism when Kyle Rittenhouse had even charges of inappropriately being in possession of a weapon thrown out by the judge of his case. White vigilantism was also at play in Georgia when Ahmaud Arbery was hunted and chased down by 3 white men in 2 different trucks, all with weapons. But his murderers were found guilty. So at least there was a follow-up case in which more obviously condemnable white vigilantism was punished. In Kyle Rittenhouse's case, I understand that it was more challenging to make an argument for murder or reckless homicide because of videos showing people trying to take Kyle's weapon away from him because they presumed him to be an active shooter. Most people understand why a young white man with a gun that he was visibly too young to hold would be assumed to be an active shooter, particularly with people calling out, he's killed a man. And he had killed a man. He'd killed Jacob Rosenbaum. It's a complicated scenario, and I don't really want to rehash it right now, other than to say vigilantism is a bad practice, and taking somebody's life is a very consequential action and should be treated with appropriate severity by the court system and by juries and by the public. And property destruction, I think, is sometimes taken very seriously by white conservatives who presume it to be a precursor to something more deadly. And that's because of a belief they have, I presume, that if you allow black people to destroy property without serious retributive consequences, then next you may have black people who go further in their pursuit of justice and equality. They are fearful that a pursuit of justice and equality will mean depriving them of systems of wealth, of systems of judicial favoritism and legal pandering and political pandering that has entrenched white people in a favored position in society. And they might fear for their lives. They might fear that, yes, they won't be as safe. The police might not selectively preference white interests. They're afraid. Hi, Molly. I see you, and it's nice to see you. So I'm sympathetic to the goal of wanting your family to be safe, and I'm unsympathetic to the goal of wanting to maintain preferential treatment and to maintain access to systems of wealth generation at the expense of that subset of the American community, American society, that is Black people who are still often disproportionately followed, disproportionately investigated, disproportionately charged, disproportionately arrested, disproportionately convicted of minor crimes that they are targeted in that way because of a baked-in systematic level of undue suspicion targeted at Black people. Racial profiling is often very evident with relation to minor drug crimes because academics have established that white people and Black people commit minor drug crimes at similar rates, but Black people are more likely to be targeted, investigated, charged, and imprisoned for those minor drug crimes. And that should be illustrative to us all of endemic problems with the justice system in the United States, and that police departments have to spend significant amounts of money on PR, public relations and marketing departments to promote their good works for the community in order to mitigate the damaging public relations effects of actual facts hitting the news. Oh, the computer does wobble. All right. The three residents of Florida retirement community, the Villages, have been arrested and face charges of casting more than one vote in the 2020 election. The important thing about that is that it shows voter fraud is minor, and they can catch you if you do it. If you vote twice, it may take a few months, but people get you. This is a picture of the three faces of three residents being arrested. I would imagine these people also felt that they were acting on instruction from Trump, who stressed that there was the possibility of voter fraud, and so they wanted to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, perhaps. All right, now let's see. I'm going to just take that off screen for a second. Put myself back here while I look up a short video, a short news story. Oh, a few people have retweeted my broadcast, which I'm going to say thank you for that, because sharing the word is helpful to boost circulation. Okay, so I can easily find this video because I tweeted a link to it to my neighbor, and then I told the internet what I had done. I often want my neighbor to know things that I'm sure Fox News won't tell him. So this happens a lot. Okay, let's put it back on screen and I'll press play. This is a news story about the three Trump-supporting Republicans from the MAGA capital of Florida, the Villages, who have just been arrested and charged with voting more than once.
Lisa, it appears this may be the first time in at least 20 years that anyone in Sumter County has been arrested and prosecuted for casting more than one vote. And we could find very few similar cases in other Central Florida counties.
Because voter fraud is rare.
No one answered the door at the home of Jay Ketzik. He's one of three residents of the Villages who've recently been arrested on charges related to voter fraud. Investigators say Ketzik voted by mail in Florida during the 2020 election and then cast a second absentee ballot in his home state of Michigan. Likewise, while living in this home in the Villages, investigators say Joan Halstead voted twice, once in Florida and once by absentee ballot in New York. We don't know who Ketzik and Halstead voted for in the 2020 election. Records show both are registered as Republicans in Florida, and both expressed support for former President Donald Trump on their Facebook pages. A third Republican voter from the Villages, John Ryder, was arrested on a warrant while at a Port Canaveral cruise ship terminal.
Election integrity is a top priority for Governor DeSantis and for me.
Florida's Secretary of State Laurel Lee recently launched this new webpage dedicated to election integrity, where citizens can fill out a form to report voter fraud. And Governor Ron DeSantis has proposed a new state Office of Election Crimes and Security.
They're going to have the ability to investigate any crimes involving the election. And I think that's going to be something that's very, very important.
Prosecutors say Sumter County Supervisor of Elections Bill Keene uncovered these recent voter irregularities, but he declined to comment, citing the ongoing criminal investigation. Ketzik, Halstead, and Ryder face up to 5 years in prison if convicted of casting more than one vote. But as News 6 discovered, very few other Floridians have been prosecuted.
Okay. All right. To get rid of that. So yes, three Republicans, all living in the village, prosecuted under a new level of Republican vigilance about so-called voter fraud, because it doesn't matter to them what the actual level of voter fraud is or who's committing the voter fraud, that it's Republicans. What matters to them is pushing forwards a narrative that says we have to make voting more difficult to stop there being voter irregularities like this. Those three people are not likely to get a 5-year sentence, even though that is the maximum. The person who got a 5-year jail sentence is Crystal Mason, and I'll bring up her GoFundMe because it's shameful how she's been treated. She is essentially a victim of the Republican commitment to pushing a false narrative on the public to say that voter fraud is widespread, that it's a big problem. It's a tiny problem. It's picked up when people vote twice, as is evident by the case of the 3 villages residents who are Republicans and who presumably voted 2 times for Donald Trump. Crystal Mason's GoFundMe, because she only has $15,000 and years of her life have been taken from her in just stress. So she was held in prison for a while and then eventually released on bail. Her case is under appeal. She was originally ashamed and sort of hiding. What happened is that she cast a provisional vote in the Democratic primary elections. She cast a provisional vote because she'd promised her mother she would vote, but when she turned up at a polling booth, her name was not on the electoral roll. So a poll official told her, well, you can just write this provisional vote out and then officials will review your vote to see what's happened and why you're not on the rolls. The reason why she wasn't on the rolls was because she was still under federal supervised release. She'd served a 5-year jail sentence for tax fraud, finished her sentence, been released from prison. And she did not read the fine print on the voting form that says you can't vote if you're a felon, and if you're on federal supervised release. That was one of the tiny fine print things. That's very understandable. A lot of people don't read the fine print, and her parole officers testified that they had not informed her, Crystal Mason, that voting would be something she would not be able to do until whatever period that she was on federal supervised release extended for. So she thought she was being a good citizen and she was fulfilling a promise to her mother to vote in an important primary election. I personally don't agree with her politics. I think she was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, but she's a Democrat. That's something. And she's a victim. She is a complete victim of Republican disinformation. This confected narrative of, oh, voter fraud is so endemic, we have to find one for you and make an example of that person. So Crystal Mason's vote was not counted. She cast a provisional vote, meaning before anybody counted her vote, it was going to be reviewed. And when they reviewed her vote and punched her name into the system, they found, yep, federal supervised release, not legally allowed to vote under Texas law, have to throw her vote out. So her vote was not counted. But guess what was counted? Her case was counted as a scapegoat, an example to scapegoat, a Black woman attracting a 5-year jail sentence for something she did in good faith to be a good citizen. And why such a severe sentence? To discourage Black people from voting, to fill them with fear of the legal system, to say even if you didn't mean any harm, even if you were just trying to do the right thing, you followed officials' recommendations and you just cast a provisional vote because your name couldn't be found on the voter rolls, even if you were just trying to show your love for your country, by participating in the democratic system of primary elections and then federal elections, you will be found fault with, we'll get you, and we'll put you away for 5 years. That's a big, powerful deterrent to other voters of color, because they can read that message loud and clear, which is why I have to interpret it for white people. So we know what Republicans are up to, trying to deter and intimidate black voters in order to make America a one-party state that's an authoritarian construct and not a functional democracy where all people are enfranchised to vote. All adults are enfranchised to vote. All adult citizens are enfranchised to vote. So, making this bigger so people can see. If you want to Google it, you can for yourself. I'm not running the fundraiser. It's Crystal Mason is running the fundraiser, and it's been operational for a while. The goal is 60,000. I'm Crystal Mason. I was convicted and sentenced for a non-violent white-collar offense in 2011. I cast a provisional ballot in the 2016 elections and was convicted of illegal voting in 2018. My time for the 2011 offense was complete, but I was on supervised release. Since 2018, I have been fighting a sentence of 5 years jail time. I'm still in this fight. I have fought to save my house. I have fought to keep a job. I am still fighting for my freedom. With your help, I have not been fighting this battle alone. I am so grateful for the petitions and articles. You have helped me so much and inspired to start my Crystal Mason the Fight.org organization. This journey has changed my life and my family's lives. I'm committed to educating ex-offenders, the youth, and the community on why voting is important. I have 12 family members that I deputized to register you to vote in Tarrant and Dallas County. This journey has been an educational process, and I want to share and spread knowledge of how important your voice is. So she's in Fort Worth in Texas. I have read multiple articles about Crystal Mason and her journey to have this 5-year jail sentence overturned. So various judges in Texas have dismissed her appeal, but it's still going through the process of further appeals to higher court systems. She lost a job because of the conviction. She's been fighting to keep her house, and her son had to give up a athletic scholarship at a university, at a college, I should say, for Americans, in order to support his mum and support his family. It's just completely intolerable how that Republican drive to frame it as being a serious problem of voter fraud and to scapegoat this woman for her inadvertent voting error. So that's why I am keen to share her story with people. Okay. Now I'm going to go do some other things shortly, but I have a couple more points, and that is that it's the 9th anniversary of Sandy Hook. And this is a tragedy that shouldn't go without mention, and I might just read aloud the names of the children and their teachers who lost their lives in defense of the children. All right, so December the 14th, I can make this on screen. December 14th is the 9th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. On that day in 2012, a gunman killed 26 people, 12 girls, 8 boys, and 6 women, at a school in Newtown, Connecticut. In remarks commemorating the anniversary, President Biden pleaded with Congress to act on gun violence prevention. As a nation, we owe all these families more than our prayers, Biden said in a video released by the White House. We owe them action. In the years when the Sandy Hook anniversary has fallen on a school day, the belief have prevailed that kids were better off in class than at home. But the threats have multiplied since the school shooting in Michigan. But the threats that have multiplied since the school shooting in Michigan have changed things. So when where was I when Sandy Hook happened in Australia? A nation where semi-automatic weapons were outlawed, and a national levy was raised on the people of Australia in order to buy back semi-automatic weapons and then melt them down and destroy them, and decrease the likelihood that innocent people would be shot, which also significantly decreased the suicide rate in Australia as well, because people who attempt to commit suicide by guns are far more likely to be successful than people who use other methodologies in their suicide attempts. And the Israeli army, in fact, found a significant reduction in soldier suicide rate when they instituted a new policy of precluding soldiers from taking guns home with them when they visited their homes. So they had to leave their guns on the army base. And the suicide rate dropped significantly, because without access to lethal weapons, human emotions or transitory moods of depression and anxiety are much less likely to be acted on in a deadly way. Molly's noting that her mail-in ballot came in late and not enough time to mail, and therefore you filled out a paper ballot at the polling place. And I imagine, well, at least it's worthwhile suspecting that was purposeful, that the Trump-appointed Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, interfered with the delivery of mail, purposefully slowed mail delivery so that people wouldn't receive their mail-in ballots on time, and would therefore not have a plan to vote in person during a pandemic, and would therefore be deterred from voting, and that would primarily impact Biden voters, because he had already recommended to Republican voters that they not vote by mail, and had told them that it was an inherently bad way to vote because foreign actors could somehow steal your vote and transpose your vote to be for somebody else. So Republicans took that on board and were less likely, as a consequence, to vote by mail, whereas Democrats, whose candidate Joe Biden believed in the science as elucidated by doctors and researchers, that COVID was significant, that COVID was spread by being in the presence of other people who could either be obviously symptomatic or asymptomatically infected with COVID. So people wanted to avoid long wait queues to vote. But ultimately, enough Americans made that effort, regardless of whether or not they'd received their mail-in ballot in time. They made that effort to vote in person if they didn't get a mail-in ballot. And people made a lot of effort to try and make sure that mail-in ballots were delivered to polling places within certain periods of time to count them as well. All right. We have to make sure that this country doesn't lose its sense of outrage about what's going on, Senator Chris Murphy said of the 9th anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre. Yes, too many children are in fear for their lives at schools. Biden pleads for Congress to act on gun control is a headline in the Washington Post. And I would like to say that Democratic senators are on board with gun control. So really, pleading for Congress is a bit of whitewashing, Republican washing by the press, who should say Biden is pleading to Republican senators to stop obstructing Democratic moves to introduce more safeguards for gun possession and gun ownership in the United States. Yeah, Biden urging the Senate. Okay, we can listen to President Biden. That's good.
Folks, 9 years ago today, the families in Newtown were hit especially hard. No matter how long it's been, every one of those families relives the news they got that day. 20 precious first graders, 6 heroic educators, a lone gunman in an unconscionable act of violence. Everything changed that morning for you, and the nation was shocked. For me and for Barack, the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School was one of the saddest days we were in office, those 8 years. But as we got to know you, and I got to know so many of you personally, I spoke to every one of your families and I found hope in your strength as you turned pain into purpose to change the laws and the culture around gun violence. At the time, remember, because of your leadership, we forged a broad coalition and enacted more than 20 executive orders. We came close to legislation, but we came up short. It was so darn frustrating. And it's still frustrating now for you and me and so many others. In Parkland, Florida, in Oxford, Michigan, in countless communities across the country, there's these horrific shootings that make national headlines and embarrass us as a nation. And for many others, every day, particularly in Black and brown communities, there's the equivalent of a mass shooting we don't even hear about. As a nation, we owe all these families more than our prayers. We owe them action. From my earliest months as president, I've acted, curbing the proliferation of ghost guns, cracking down on rogue gun dealers, promoting safe firearm storage. You know, my American Rescue Plan is a fancy way of saying historic $470 billion investment. We encourage states and cities to use that money to reduce gun violence, among other things. In my budget, I'm calling for doubling the funding for gun violence prevention research, including examining gun violence as a public health threat, which it is in my view. There are 3 common sense bills to reduce gun violence that the Senate should pass now, right away, long overdue. One requires more extensive background checks for gun sales. One is to keep guns out of the hands of more abusers. My Build Back Better legislation, which would make a landmark $5 billion investment in community violence prevention and intervention programs to support trusted leaders who work directly with people who are most likely to commit gun crimes or become gun victims before it's too late. These programs work. Again, I know our politics is frustrating. It can be frustrating. It's particularly frustrating now. But we can't give up hope. We can't stop. I've helped beat the NRA with your help twice. It can be done again. We have to keep up the pressure. May God bless all those innocent lives in Newtown and all across the country. And all of you who have been the victims of gun violence and your families have suffered from it. My heart breaks for you, but we have to act. We can't give up. We got to get it done. God bless you all, and God bless the loved ones who are left behind.
I'm glad I listened to the whole speech. That was very important. And moving to think that, yes, he's been in office and he's had to contend with the dysfunctionality of American politics, that there's some baked in obstructionism that's often concealed under the name of bipartisanship. There's this bipartisan filibuster that stops any one party from having too much power. Yeah, too much power to get things done that are needed to save American lives. Not just to prevent deaths from gun violence, but to prevent all the people who have to live with the legacy of fragments of bullets in their bodies and fragments of lead-coated or lead-constructed bullets that are poisoning them over the course of their lives and that doctors can't remove because it would cause too much organ damage and just too much physiological harm. So those are ongoing victims of gun violence as well. And whilst people operate guns, increasing or over proliferation of guns and over easy access to guns is a situation that contributes to death, that contributes to the rates of violence in America. Molly says, I really like President Biden. I'm glad, Molly. You'll be glad to hear too that I gave my neighbor, not a Trump supporting neighbor, literally a Democrat neighbor who was today trying to tell me rude things about President Biden, to just disparage him to me. I'm the wrong person to disparage Biden to, but today I was the right person because without directly telling her I thought she was wrong, I was able to say that, yes, my father told me something similar in 2020 that was disparaging of President Biden's abilities. And I told him, Dad, you've been listening to too much right-wing propaganda, that's all. As a speech pathologist, I can tell you that some of Biden's diction issues are not a function of age, but are a function of someone with a lifelong stuttering problem, and that there's some pauses and circumlocutions, which means a way of talking around a word that you suspect might trigger a stuttering behavior. So you can feel your brain locking on a word. You find a circumvention in a grammatical and syntactical sense around that word that is causing you problems. And it can come out as perhaps a pause because you don't know what to say, and it can come out in various ways. So as a qualified speech pathologist, I'm going to say that I see evidence of that rather than evidence of any purported negative qualities that people try and ascribe to Biden. Don't do it to me because I won't let it pass. So my neighbor learned that, and by the end of the conversation, she was at least choosing not to articulate any more her concerns. They're not really her concerns. You get exposed to something over and over again, and you begin to adopt it as common sense or just something that's just taken broadly to be true. Yep, that's the beauty of propaganda. You hear it from multiple sources, it begins to feel broadly true. Molly has mild stuttering, so she understands him. That's great. It was really a strong point of the Biden campaign that he had reached out to a boy called Harrison in his campaign whose father said he stutters, but he knows you also have a stutter. And then candidate Biden really took that boy under his wing and gave him tips on how to speak. And then they invited him to make a speech in Biden's campaign on the DNC convention. And that was beautiful. That boy did an amazing job of his speech. He was clearly employing techniques of underlining certain words in his speech to focus on his goal points to get to and celebrate. So he could have a sense of accomplishment that moved him forwards and moved him past any speech-related anxiety. He did a bang-up job with that speech, and Americans loved it. Molly notes that considering Trump's diction, Biden is doing great. Yes. What are you doing, darling? Putting the lights on. All right. It's fun living in America. We've done a lot for Halloween, and now we're doing a lot for Christmas in terms of putting out lights, not just to fit in with our neighbors, but because we promised that for our children. We said when we're going to move to America, and in America, they make a big deal out of Halloween and Christmas, and our children were very excited by that. So we're fulfilling that promise to them. We're going hard on Halloween and we're going hard for Christmas, as befits the neighborhood where they've really enjoyed seeing all the Christmas lights around in our community as well, our new community in Massachusetts. But I'm crying because it's the 9th anniversary of Sandy Hook, and we've exposed our children to the downside of American society, which is intractably high levels of gun violence. And I say intractably, but I'm hoping that this is the year where steps are taken, and not just Congress does something about it, but Republicans lose power and lose access to power, and Republican-affiliated Democrats, such as Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, lose significance and lose power. Maybe it'll be 2022, and we vote in some more Democratic senators to finally diminish the destructive influence of so many NRA captured politicians on America's systems of governance and on proposed legislation. Jane's here. Hi, Jane. And Molly's made an observation. I'm going to scroll back a bit. Molly's made an observation about stuttering, that singing really helped you. That's fantastic. That was in the King's speech as well. And as a speech pathologist in my training, I didn't hear much about singing as a strategy, but I would love to pursue that more, because music is definitely, or brain centers that engage with music occur more diffusely across the brain than speech centers. So in a way, you're bringing on more resources when you involve singing and speech. Jane says, hello, Dav. Hello, Jane. Molly wanted to hug Harrison. I can believe you. I wanted to hug him too. He was lovely. Molly says, I went feral caroling. Now, is that a typo, or is there really such a thing as feral caroling? I'm so curious now. Oh, and I have noticed that there is Lucy Bath on screen, and so I'm going to share my Twitter screen with, oops. Here we go. Oh, 1 second. I'm going to put something on screen to give you something to look at and then answer my phone very briefly because this is important. Hello. Hello. I just had a really quick query, so I'm so glad you've called back. And that is to say, do your driving instructors go to somebody's house to give you a lesson? So do they bring a vehicle to your house, or do you have to go to the driving center? Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay, so online there'll be different options, and maybe I can choose an option that says I want. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Oh, and do other vacancies? Because I just want like 1 or 2 hours of driving lessons. I'm an adult driver who just needs a Massachusetts license. Oh yes, I'm new. I have never signed up with your driving school before. Yeah, that's fine. I'll sign up for New Year online after New Year. I'll try to do that. Great. hopefully sometime in January. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll get on that straight. Okay, bye-bye. Okay. All right. Community cat people singing. So that was, some of us yowled. Well, that's an exciting comment, Molly. How funny. Yes, I'm trying to organize driving school because I'm Australian. I had an Australian driving license. It's lapsed now. And I need a new license. So I've taken my learner's permit exam. I've got a learner's permit license. I need to take the actual driving exam, and to build up my confidence driving American style on the right side of the road, I want a couple of hours of training with an official instructor. So that's my excitement. Someone called Dave, the YouTuber, says hi. I'll say hi, but I'm wary of new folks because I am good friends with the people I'm familiar with. But let's see what you're like, Dave. Welcome to the conversation. So yes, what I have up on screen is the NPR Politics headline, which says 2021 has been an incredibly deadly year for gun violence, with more than 42,000 people killed in the US so far. And now some of the people whose lives have been changed by gun violence are taking the step of running for public office. Well, Lucy Bath is on screen, and she's not newly running for office. She's already obtained an elected position. She succeeded in her run for office. Oh, Durham County Commissioner Nita Allen was inspired to run for office in North Carolina after 3 of her friends were killed by a neighbor in 2015. Earlier this year, the gun control group Everytown launched a new program to train its volunteers to run for office. More than 100 people are participating in Demand a Seat this year. Among them is Mia Levis-Porter, who is running for a California Assembly seat and whose brother Junior took his own life with a gun after battling mental illness. She said that for years she felt powerless, but that changed when she joined Mums Demand Action, an arm of Everytown. I felt empowered to use my voice as a survivor, and I saw how it could make legislative change. So yes, according to the nonprofit Gun Violence Archive, that there's been more than 42,000 people killed in the United States. And then I imagine you would be able to double that number to describe how many people are victims of gun violence as well, in terms of having residual bullet fragments remaining in their bodies, slowly contributing to elevated lead levels for them. Jane wants to know how Brian is. Yes, I haven't said hello to Brian for a while. He's a nurse in Florida, and so he's probably quite busy because Florida still has a relatively high level of outbreak, and their governor, Republican Ron DeSantis, is actively hostile to vaccinations and to COVID mitigation measures such as mask mandates. Masks are far more effective when they're worn at high levels of participation. So me wearing a mask protects other people from me, but if I want to be protected, I need to either wear a very tight mask or to have a high level, 80% of people around me wearing a mask if I'm sharing a space with them. All right, so these are the, oh Jesus, I'm going to cry because I have a first grader. On the 9th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting, we remember those we lost. Charlotte Bacon, 6. Daniel Barden, 7. Rachel Davino, 29. Olivia Engel, 6. Josephine Gay, 7. Dylan Hockley, 6. Dawn Hochsprung, 47. Madeline Sue, 6. Catherine Hubbard, 6. Chase Kalowski, 7. Jesse Lewis, 6. Anna Marquez Green, 6. James Matoli, 6. Grace McDonald, 7. Anne-Marie Murphy, 52. Emily Parker, 6. Jack Pinto, 6. Noah Posner, 6. Carolyn Pruvidi, 6. Jessica Rekos, 6. Abiel Richmond, 6. Lauren Rousseau, 30. Mary Sherlock, 56. Victoria Soto, 27. Benjamin Wheeler, 6. Alison Wyatt, 6. Wow, that's very effective to engage with the enormity of that loss, the enormity of America's collective loss, which occurs as a consequence of people voting for Republicans and Republicans being compromised by a lobby group for gun manufacturers, the NRA, who in turn have funding and backing from the Russian authoritarian government. And that's extraordinary that that they're also victimized by the passivity of the rest of us, that we haven't yet found a way to be sufficiently outraged in a way that we have enough sustained opposition to counter the legislative level. And that's okay. We'll have enough fight in us and enough outrage in us and enough perseverance when we understand that those obstacles are a product of racism and a product of a racist resolve for people to maintain the primacy of the Second Amendment related rights over the rights of other people to live their lives, because it discontinues their lives when gun rights are fetishized and are just prioritized over other people's rights to live in freedom and peace. So that's all from me for today. Thank you, Jane and Molly, so much for your company, and Dave, the YouTuber from Twitch as well. So lots of my comments are coming from Twitch today, which is nice. I think a lot of people must have migrated over to Twitch, and maybe I'm using a platform called StreamYard to multi-broadcast to multiple platforms, Twitch and Twitter and YouTube. But I might have a look at Twitch as well to see if there's anything I can do to tweak my engagement with that platform, because it seems to be increasingly popular. And bless all your hearts. Take care of yourselves and each other. In life, every day we can choose love or fear or passivity, I guess. It's that choice has been put to me before as a choice between love or fear, but there's more. there's passivity as well. And passivity is not cutting it for me anymore. And I know that by your presence here as well, passivity isn't cutting it anymore for you either. My ambitions are, I'm trying to resurrect my ambitions to write a newsletter that people could maybe even physically print out and hand out to people in their neighborhood if they wanted, just to feel like they're being loud with their voice, just to help people be their own voice in a more loud way, because sometimes we can't articulate everything we want. But if I can bring together a collection of things that have been well articulated and make a contribution myself of things I can articulate as well, put that out there in a way that carries some resonance and that could be easily distributable and is a countermeasure to the passivity of a metaverse where people just consume content, or just rail to acquire on social media amongst circles of their own friends, but something you can physically hand out with, because social media allows us to find like-minded people, and that can give us strength, but we should be using that strength to be able to exercise positive influence on people, on the people around us and the people in our communities, so that there's less people who just throw up their hands and fail to vote or vote for Republicans. We need people voting for Democrats, because that's the party with a stronger commitment to democracy and a stronger commitment to pro-social activity on the behalf of Americans, a stronger commitment to protecting our children, to protecting their futures, to protecting our climate, and to protecting us and safeguarding us from a worsening of the pattern of increasingly frequent and increasingly severe extreme weather events, because that is a fact. And it's a fact that is often denied by people who prefer the passivity of denialism, of just saying, no, I choose to say that problem doesn't exist, rather than making an emotional effort to respond to it with either love or fear. So Molly's saying she's on Twitch, Jane's on Twitch. Molly also noted that the NRA should not have tax-exempt status. And Molly said thank you, and I'll say thank you to all of you all. See you again soon.